Some stories don't need fancy beginnings. This one starts the way most true things do, with a woman on a dusty road, going somewhere nobody wanted her to go. I've been collecting these frontier tales for years now. Stories about folks who didn't fit anywhere, until they found the one place they belonged. This particular account came from an old journal I found in a cedar chest at an estate sale outside Denver. The woman who wrote it never gave her full name, just signed it A. What follows is her story, or the bones of it. At least, I've filled in what I could from the pages that survived. Some things you'll have to feel for yourself. The sixth quilt went into the cedar chest on a Tuesday. Elias Morgan didn't watch the wagon disappear down the mountain road. Never did. He turned his back before the wheels hit the first rut, walked inside, and closed the door against the October wind. 6 women, 6 quilts. 6 times he'd stood on that porch and waited for the dust to settle. The cabin held its breath. He moved to the cedar chest in the corner, oak-bound, brass-hinged, older than anything else he owned. Inside, 5 quilts lay folded in careful squares, blue, yellow, white with red stitching, green, cream with brown edges. He added the 6th, pale pink, still smelled like her perfume. She'd lasted 4 days. The letter from the agency sat on the table where he'd left it that morning. One more candidate, it said. Difficult to place. His hand hovered over the paper, then dropped. If you're reading this from somewhere with mountains of your own or just a quiet porch where you take your evening rest, we'd be glad to know where you're joining us from. As the old folks used to say, a story shared is a burden halved. The stagecoach smelled of sweat and tobacco, and something sour that Abigail chose not to name. 3 days climbing into the Rockies. 3 days of wooden benches that found every bruise, every soft place where her body pressed against the unforgiving slats. The woman across from her had shifted to the far corner an hour out of Denver and hadn't moved since. The man beside her kept his elbow pressed against the window frame, making himself small, as if whatever she had might spread. Abigail looked down at her hands folded in her lap. The buttons on her dress strained at the waist. She'd let out the seams twice since leaving Ohio. And still the fabric pulled. Her traveling coat barely closed across her chest. She'd stopped trying to button it somewhere around Kansas. Let them look. Let them scoot and shuffle and pretend she wasn't there. She'd been invisible her whole life, or worse. Too visible in all the wrong ways. At least here, nobody pretended otherwise. The coach lurched. Her stomach dropped. They were climbing the final grade now. Switchbacks carved into rock that seemed to go straight up into the clouds. Copper Ridge appeared without warning, a scatter of wooden buildings clinging to a flat stretch between 2 peaks. 1 church, 1 saloon, a general store with a crooked sign, dust the color of dried blood. The coach stopped. The driver climbed down, opened the door. He offered his hand to the woman across from her, then to the man. Then he stepped back, looked at Abigail, looked at the width of her hips, the space she'd need to fit through the door, and busied himself with the luggage straps. She gripped the door frame, turned sideways, stepped down onto Colorado dirt without anyone's help. Her boots hit the ground solid, steady. The street had gone quiet. A woman in a blue bonnet whispered something to her husband. A boy stopped sweeping the boardwalk to stare. Inside the general store, the smell of pickle brine and coffee beans. A thin man behind the counter, Finch, according to the sign outside, watched her over wire-rimmed spectacles. "Help you, ma'am. I need to hire a wagon, someone to take me up the mountain." He didn't move. "You the one going to Morgan's place?" "I am." Finch set down his pencil. "Ma'am, Ain't none of my business. But that man's run off 6 women already. Ain't right in the head, folks say. Then I reckon he's due for a change. His mouth opened, closed. He named a price $2 instead of 1. She paid without a word. The wagon driver loaded her single trunk. As they rolled toward the mountain road, Finch's voice carried through the open door. That's the one, Mercy. The wagon hit a rut. Somewhere up that mountain, smoke rose from a chimney she couldn't yet see. The wagon crested the final ridge as the sun touched the western peaks. Abigail saw the cabin first, a dark shape against the gray rock, smoke threading from a stone chimney, pine trees crowded close on 3 sides, a small barn, a corral with 2 horses, a vegetable garden gone brown with the season. The driver pulled the wagon to a stop 50 yards from the porch. "This is far as I go, ma'am." She climbed down, her knees protesting after hours on the hard bench. Her trunk hit the dirt with a thud. The wagon was already turning before she could straighten her skirts. The cabin door stood open. A figure filled the frame tall, broad-shouldered, arms crossed over a worn canvas shirt. He didn't move, didn't wave, didn't call out a greeting. Abigail picked up her trunk by the rope handle. Heavy. Her shoulders burned before she'd taken 10 steps. She set it down, pressed a hand to her lower back where the weight always settled, caught her breath, picked it up again. 20 more steps. Set it down. The corset dug into her ribs. Sweat ran down between her shoulder blades despite the October chill. He watched her the whole way, didn't offer to help. When she reached the porch, she set the trunk at her feet and looked up at him. Sun-weathered face. Dark hair shot through with gray at the temples premature. She thought, for a man who couldn't be much past 35. Eyes the color of creek water in winter. Pale. Cold. Giving nothing away. "Mr. Morgan? You're late." Stage was delayed in Denver. He turned and walked inside. She followed, her hip brushing the door frame as she passed through. The cabin was clean. That was the first thing she noticed. Swept floors, scrubbed table, not a dish out of place, a cast-iron stove against the far wall, still warm, dried herbs hanging from the rafters, a rocking chair by the window that looked like it hadn't been sat in for years. 2 chairs at the table, one worn smooth, one covered in dust. He stood by the stove, arms still crossed. "Rules." She waited. "You sleep in the back room. I sleep out here. Meals at 6 and noon and 6. Don't move my things. Don't rearrange the furniture. Don't touch the cedar chest in the corner." She glanced at the chest. Oak and brass, old and well-made. Something about it made her look away. Josephine, the 4th one, spent 3 days crying and rearranging everything. Couldn't find my own boots in my own house. His jaw tightened. She left on the 4th morning. Said she couldn't stand the quiet. I ain't much for rearranging. And no talking after dark. I sleep light. I ain't much for talking neither. Something flickered across his face, gone before she could read it. "Good." Silence. The stove ticked as it cooled. Outside, a horse nickered in the corral. Abigail looked around the cabin one more time. The wood was good. The roof didn't sag. The windows had real glass, not oiled paper. A man who kept a house this clean wasn't crazy, no matter what the town said. "You keep a clean house, Mr. Morgan." His arms dropped a fraction of an inch. "What I said you keep things neat. That's good. She reached up and untied her bonnet, her thick fingers working the knot loose. Hung it on the hook beside the door like she'd done it 100 times before. Now, where's the well? He stared at her for a long moment, then pointed through the window. North side of the barn, buckets by the door. She walked out without another word. The cold air hit her damp skin, and she shivered. But she didn't slow down. The well was stone-lined, deep, with a wooden windlass and a rope that needed replacing soon. She lowered the bucket, heard the splash, hauled it up hand over hand. Her arms shook by the time it reached the top. The water was cold and clear and tasted like mountain rock. She carried it back inside, stopping twice to rest. He hadn't moved from his spot by the stove. You got flour cornmeal, pantry, back corner. She found what she needed: salt pork in a crock, lard in a tin. She built up the fire, mixed the corn pone, set the salt pork to frying. The smell filled the cabin, grease and wood smoke, and something almost like home. He sat at the table without being asked. She set a plate in front of him, sat across with her own, the chair creaking under her weight. They ate in silence. He didn't compliment the food, didn't complain, just ate, steady and methodical, until his plate was clean. She washed the dishes in the basin, dried them with a flour sack towel, put them away where she'd found them. The kerosene lamp on the table cast a circle of yellow light. Beyond the windows, the mountain had gone black. "Good night, Mr. Morgan." He looked up from the fire. His face was half in shadow. "Good night." She closed the bedroom door behind her. Small room, rope bed, straw mattress, washstand with a chipped basin, a single window looking out at dark pines. Someone had left a quilt folded at the foot of the bed. Blue and white, wedding ring pattern. She didn't touch it. She undressed in the dark, her fingers fumbling with buttons that had grown too tight. Lay down on the unfamiliar mattress. Listened to the cabin settle around her. Through the thin wall, she heard him moving. The creak of the rocking chair. Then nothing. The silence stretched. Minutes, maybe an hour. She was almost asleep when she heard the scrape of the cedar chest opening. The soft rustle of fabric being touched, counted. Then the lid closing again. 6 quilts. And he was checking to make sure they were all still there. The 5th morning, Elias left a list on the table before dawn. Abigail found it beside her coffee cup when she came out of the back room. Her body still stiff from another night on the unfamiliar mattress. His handwriting was cramped, angular, like he'd learned to write in a hurry and never bothered to improve. Scrub floors, haul water 6 buckets, feed chickens, muck the stalls. She read it twice, folded the paper, tucked it into her apron pocket. The floors took most of the morning. Pine boards, rough cut, full of splinters that caught on the brush. Her knees ached before she'd finished the first corner. By the time she reached the bedroom, her lower back had locked up tight. The familiar pain that came from carrying too much weight on a frame that had never been built for it. She sat back on her heels, pressed both hands into the small of her back, breathed through the spasm until it passed. Then she kept scrubbing. The water was worse. 6 trips to the well, 6 trips back. The bucket handle cut into her palms until she wrapped it with a strip of flour sack. By the 3rd trip, her lungs burned. By the 4th, She had to stop halfway across the yard. Bent over, hands on her knees, sweat dripping off her chin despite the October chill. An old woman in Ohio had once told her that bodies like hers weren't meant for hard labor, that she should find a man who could afford servants. She picked up the bucket, kept walking. The chickens were easy. The stalls were not. She hadn't mucked a stall since she was 12. Helping her father on the farm outside Columbus, the pitchfork was too long for her arms. The manure had frozen in patches, soft and reeking in others. She gagged twice. Her shoulders screamed from the repetitive motion. She finished anyway. When Elias rode back that evening, the stalls were clean, the water barrel was full, the cabin smelled of lye soap and fresh bread. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking around like he'd walked into the wrong house. She set his plate on the table without a word. The 6th day. The list was longer. Chop wood, stacked by the barn. The wood pile he'd left her was a jumble of unsplit logs, some thick as her thigh. The axe leaned against the chopping block hickory handle, iron head, heavy enough that she needed both hands to lift it. She'd never split wood in her life. The first swing missed entirely. The second glanced off the side and sent the axe spinning into the dirt. The third connected. But the blade stuck halfway through and wouldn't come free no matter how hard she wrenched. Her arms shook. Her back seized. She sat down on the chopping block and let herself breathe, just for a moment. Her face hot with something that might have been shame. Then she stood up, planted her foot on the log, pulled the axe free, tried again. By noon, her shoulders had gone numb. By mid-afternoon, her hands were blistered despite the work gloves she'd found in the barn. The skin had torn on her right palm, and blood mixed with the sweat on the axe handle. The pile of split wood grew slowly. Too slowly. She thought about stopping. Thought about the wagon ride back down the mountain. The looks she'd get in town. The whispers. She split another log. The sun was touching the western ridge when she heard hoofbeats on the trail. She set down the axe, her arms so weak she nearly dropped it, and watched Elias ride into the clearing. He stopped the horse, stared at the wood pile. It wasn't much. 3 days' worth. Maybe 4. Nothing compared to what a man his size could have done, but it was stacked in neat rows against the barn wall. Every piece she'd managed to split since morning. Abigail sat on the porch steps, his torn shirt spread across her lap, a needle and thread in her bloodied hands. She'd found the shirts in a drawer, 3 of them, all missing buttons or split at the seams. Work that needed doing. She didn't look up when he approached. "Axe is dull," she said. "Left it in the barn. Needs sharpening." He didn't answer. She heard him dismount, lead the horse to the corral. The barn door opened and closed. When he came back, he stood at the bottom of the porch steps, hat in his hands. "Where'd you learn to split wood?" "Didn't." She bit off the thread with her teeth, her jaw tight. "Learned today." Something shifted in his face. She couldn't name it. He went inside without another word. The 7th day, there was no list. Abigail woke to coffee already brewing. She came out to find Elias at the stove, stirring oatmeal in the iron pot. "Wasn't sure if you thought oatmeal's fine?" They ate in silence, but the silence had changed. Lighter, somehow. Less like a wall and more like a door left unlocked. That afternoon, she mended while he worked leather. They sat across from each other at the table, the autumn light slanting through the glass. Land's good here, she said. Spring water. Yep. How many head you run? 40, 50 in spring. She pulled the needle through. 50's a lot for one man. A pause. Been managing? 3 words became 5 on the 9th day. 5 became 7 on the 10th. He told her about the property lines, the water rights, the neighbor who'd been eyeing his spring. On the 11th morning, she found 2 cups of coffee on the table, one at his place, one at hers. Figured you'd be up soon, he said. She wrapped her hands around the warm tin. The coffee was strong and black. Outside the window, clouds were building over the western peaks. Dark ones, the kind that meant trouble. The storm came on the first day of the 3rd week. Abigail was hanging wash on the line behind the cabin when the wind shifted. One moment, the air was still and cold. The next, it hit her like a wall-sharp, electric, carrying the smell of rain and something metallic underneath. She had the sheets down and bundled in her arms before the second gust. The sky had gone the color of a bruise. Purple-black clouds stacked on top of each other, like mountains made of smoke. She was halfway to the porch when the first drops hit, fat and cold, striking her face like tiny stones. Elias came around the corner of the barn at a run, the horses already secured. He reached the door the same moment she did. They tumbled inside together just as the sky split open. Rain hammered the roof like fists. The windows rattled in their frames. Lightning turned the cabin white, and the thunder that followed shook the floorboards under her feet. Abigail flinched. Her whole body jerked sideways, an old reflex she'd never been able to break. Ohio. The summer she was 9, a twister that had torn the neighbor's barn apart. Board by board while she'd watched from the root cellar. Her mother's hand clamped over her mouth to keep her from screaming. She pressed her back against the door, counted her breaths. 1, 2, 3. Elias was building up the fire, his movements quick and efficient. He glanced over his shoulder, saw her standing there with her arms wrapped around herself, her knuckles white. He didn't say anything, just stood up, walked to the table, and dragged his chair closer to the stove. Then he sat down and stared at the flames. The other chair, her chair, sat 3 feet away. She understood. Moved to sit beside him. The fire crackled. The rain pounded. Thunder rolled across the peaks like God-moving furniture in the room above. Back in Ohio, she said, her voice steadier than she expected. We had this cat, calico thing, mean as a snake to everyone but me. Hated thunder worse than anything. Elias didn't look at her, but his shoulders had dropped a fraction. He was listening. Used to hide under the stove when the storms came. Wouldn't come out for nothing, not food, not milk, not even the mice that got brave when the rain was loud. She pulled her shawl tighter. I'd sit on the floor next to her. Didn't try to drag her out. Just sat there so she'd know she wasn't alone. The fire popped. A log shifted, sending up sparks. What happened to it? Got old. Died in her sleep one February. She paused. Good way to go, I reckon. Reckon so. The storm raged outside. Inside. The silence had changed, still quiet. But warm now. Like bread dough rising in a covered bowl. The quilts, she said, in the cedar chest. His jaw tightened. She saw the muscle jump under his skin. 6 of them. All different colors. I know how many there are. I know how... Why do you keep them? He didn't answer right away. The rain drummed, the fire shifted and settled. Seemed wrong to throw them out, he said finally. His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it in too long. They made them, each one of them, with their own hands. Took time, took care. He stared into the flames. Wasn't their fault they couldn't stay? Whose fault was it? The question hung between them. Lightning flashed. Thunder answered, farther away now. The worst of the storm was passing east. Mine. He said it flat, like stating the color of the sky. Always mine. She didn't argue, didn't tell him he was wrong, just sat beside him and watched the fire burn. The storm lasted 3 days. They fell into a rhythm without meaning to. She cooked, he brought in wood, she mended, he worked the leather harness that had been sitting in the corner since before she'd arrived. They ate together, sat together, listened to the rain together. On the second night, he pulled a harmonica from a drawer she hadn't noticed, played something slow and wandering, the notes bending like they couldn't decide where to land. You play, she said. Badly. I didn't say well. His mouth twitched, almost a smile, gone before she could be sure. On the third morning, the rain stopped, clouds broke apart and sunlight poured through the windows, making everything look new. Need to check the stock, he said. Reaching for his coat, she stood, reached for hers. He paused at the door. You don't have to. 4 hands work faster than 2. They walked to the barn together. Mud sucked at her boots. Her skirt hem dragged in the wet. But she didn't slow down. The horses were fine, and the chickens were fine. The barn roof had held. Need to fix that board, he said, pointing to a warped plank in the corner. I can hold the ladder. He looked at her then. Really looked. The way he hadn't since she'd arrived. Abigail. Her name. Not woman. Not you. Her name. Spoken like it meant something. Elias. They stood in the barn doorway. The sun warm on their faces. The valley washed clean below. Thank you, he said, for staying through the storm. She nodded. Words felt too heavy for the moment. That evening, after supper, she found him standing at the window with an envelope in his hands. The paper was thick, expensive. The border was black, the kind used for death notices. His hands were shaking. The letter sat on this table for 3 days, unopened, untouched. Abigail didn't ask about it. She'd learned, in her 29 years, that some wounds needed time before they could bear being touched. She cooked, she mended, she went about the work of living, and she waited. On the 4th day, Elias put the envelope in a drawer beside his bed. She heard the wood slide shut. Neither of them mentioned it. 2 weeks passed. The routine they'd built held steady coffee at dawn, work through the day, supper by lamplight. The silences between them had grown comfortable, like old clothes worn soft with use. Then the wagon came. Abigail heard it before she saw it, the creak of wheels on the mountain road, the jingle of harness brass. She was kneading bread at the table, flour up to her elbows, when the sound reached her through the window. Elias was already on the porch. She could see the set of his shoulders through the doorway, tight, ready, like a man expecting a blow. The wagon rolled into the clearing. 3 men. Harlan Finch sat in the middle, his wire-rimmed spectacles catching the afternoon light. The 2 men flanking him wore city clothes, dark coats, bowler hats, faces she didn't recognize from town. Morgan? Finch climbed down with the careful movements of a man who spent more time behind a counter than in a saddle. "Hope we're not interrupting your afternoon." "You are," Finch smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes, didn't even try to. "Won't take but a minute of your time. Just wanted to introduce you to some associates of mine. Mr. Callahan here represents the Copper Ridge Development Company. And Mr. Webb is with the bank down in Denver." Elias didn't move from the porch. His hands hung loose at his sides. But Abigail could see the tension in his forearms. "Not interested. Now let's not be hasty." Finch spread his hands like a preacher mid-sermon. "We know you've got the only reliable spring for 20 miles in any direction. Good water, clean water. The kind of water a growing town needs if it's going to become something more than a wide spot in the road. Spring's not for sale. Everything's for sale. Morgan, just a matter of finding the right price." Finch's eyes slid toward the cabin door, toward Abigail, still visible through the window, her hands frozen in the bread dough. "A man in your position living way up here? All alone, well, almost alone. How long's this one been here now? 5 weeks, 6. The muscle in Elias's jaw jumped. "See? That's the thing." Finch took a step closer to the porch. His voice had dropped, turned oily. "A woman like that? She ain't exactly built for this kind of life. Is she? Look at her. How long before her knees give out? How long before she decides hauling water and scrubbing floors ain't worth the trouble of sharing a roof with a man who can't keep a wife?" Elias's hands curled into fists. "Sell now, while you can still get a fair price. Before you're too old to work the land yourself. Before she leaves like all the others. And you've got nothing but—" The cabin door opened. Abigail stepped onto the porch. She'd wiped most of the flour from her hands onto her apron, but traces still clung to her fingers, pale against her skin. She moved to stand beside Elias, not behind him, beside him. "Mr. Finch?" Her voice came out steady, level. "I believe I heard my husband say the land isn't for sale?" Finch's mouth opened, closed. His eyes darted between them, calculating. "Your husband? That's right. Ma'am, with respect, you've been here barely a month. You don't know what kind of man you've tied yourself to. You don't know what he—" "I know exactly what kind of man he is." She didn't raise her voice. Didn't need to. "I know he wakes before dawn to check his horses. I know he keeps this cabin cleaner than most women keep their kitchens. I know he plays the harmonica badly and drinks his coffee black and hasn't said a single unkind word to me since I walked through that door." She took a step forward. Finch took a step back. "I also know you've been trying to get your hands on this spring since before he built this cabin. I know you charge double to anyone heading up this mountain. And I know you told me to turn back the day I arrived, not because you gave a fig about my welfare, but because you figured a woman who looked like me wouldn't last a week." Silence. The wind moved through the pines. One of the horses stamped its foot. "Well, Mr. Finch," Abigail crossed her arms over her chest. "It's been 5 weeks. I'm still here. And if you think I'm going anywhere, you don't know the first thing about stubborn." Finch's face had gone the color of raw beef. He turned to Elias, then back to Abigail, then to his associates, who were studying the ground like it held secrets worth knowing. "This isn't over," he said. "The county board meets next month. There are legal ways to handle a man who isn't fit to hold property. Doctors who can testify, witnesses who can speak to his instability. Then I suggest you pursue them." Elias's voice was quiet, steady. "And I suggest you get off my land before I help you off it." Finch climbed back into the wagon. His associates followed without a word. The driver turned the horses, and the wagon rolled back down the mountain, disappearing around the first bend in the road. Silence. Abigail's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her apron to hide it. "You called me your husband." She turned. Elias was looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Seemed like the right word," she said. "Given the circumstances." He nodded slowly. "Abigail." "Elias? Thank you." She didn't know what to say, so she just nodded and went back inside to finish the bread. But that night, after supper, he pulled the drawer open again, the one with the black bordered letter. "I need to tell you something," he said. His voice cracked on the last word. "About why I'm the way I am." The letter was from a lawyer in Pennsylvania, a man named Whitfield. The words swam on the page as state: deceased, final settlement, unclaimed effects. Elias's hands wouldn't stop shaking. He stood by the window, his back to Abigail, the paper rattling like a dry leaf in wind. She sat at the table, her mending forgotten in her lap, and waited. "Thomas," he said finally. The name came out broken, like a bone that had healed wrong. "My brother." She didn't speak, didn't move. 8 years ago, mining accident in Leadville." He turned away from the window, walked to the door, walked back. His legs wouldn't stay still, wouldn't let him land anywhere. The cabin felt too small, the walls pressing in. "We were supposed to go together?" His voice had gone flat, dead. "Pa died, left us the farm in Pennsylvania. Wasn't worth nothing, soil gone sour. Buildings falling down. Thomas said we should head west, strike silver. Make something of ourselves instead of rotting in a place that had already given up on us." He stopped by the stove, gripped the edge until his knuckles went white. "I was supposed to meet him in Denver. Had to sell off the last of Pa's livestock first. A dozen pigs and a milk cow that nobody wanted." A sound escaped his throat, not quite a laugh, not quite anything else. "Took me 3 weeks to find buyers. 3 weeks haggling over animals while my brother was—" He couldn't finish. The words stuck in his throat like a bone. By the time I got to Leadville, they'd already pulled him out of the shaft. 3 days dead, cave in. They told me he probably didn't suffer. His hand swept across the stovetop, knocking the coffee pot to the floor with a clatter that made them both flinch. "That's what they always say, isn't it? He didn't suffer? Like that makes it better. Like that fixes anything." He looked down at the spilled coffee spreading across the floorboards. "Didn't move to clean it up. I should have been there." The words came out ragged, torn. "Should have been in that mine with him. Maybe I could have seen the timber cracking. Maybe I could have pulled him out. Maybe... Elias... Don't..." He spun toward her, his face twisted into something ugly. "Don't tell me it wasn't my fault. Don't tell me I couldn't have saved him. I've heard it all before. From the foreman. From the preacher who buried him in a hole I couldn't afford to mark with anything but a wooden cross that probably rotted away years ago." His voice cracked. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, grinding hard enough to see stars. "You want to know why I push everyone away? Why I make those lists and those rules?" He dropped his hands. His eyes were wet, red-rimmed, and he hated that she could see him like this, stripped down, cracked open. Everything ugly dragged into the light, because I don't deserve anything good. Everything I touch turns to ash. Everyone, He stopped, turned away, His shoulders hunched forward like he was trying to fold himself into something smaller. The women who came here, the brides. His voice had dropped to barely a whisper. I didn't just let them leave. I made them leave. I was cruel in small ways, cold, distant, impossible. Because if they stayed, he pressed his forehead against the cold glass of the window. If they stayed, I'd just end up burying them too. The cabin went silent. The fire had burned down to embers. The only light came from the kerosene lamp on the table, casting shadows that made everything look hollowed out. Abigail stood. Her chair scraped against the floor. Elias flinched, waiting for the sound of her footsteps heading toward the bedroom, toward the door, away from the wreck of a man standing by the window feeling sorry for himself. Instead, he heard her move toward him, felt her presence at his back, warm and solid. My pa used to say something. Her voice was quiet, steady. He'd say, you can't save a man who's already falling. You can only be there when he lands. Thomas didn't land. His voice came out raw. He just fell and kept falling. And I've been falling after him ever since. Her hand found his in the darkness. Warm fingers, rough, from weeks of work, the blisters from chopping wood, the calluses from hauling water. She didn't squeeze, just held on. Then maybe, she said, it's time to stop falling. He didn't pull away, couldn't. Her grip was the only thing keeping him tethered to the floor. I don't know how. The admission cost him something. He could feel it leaving some piece of the wall he'd spent 8 years building, crumbling like rotten timber. You don't have to know. She stepped closer, her shoulder pressed against his arm. You just have to stop running from the people trying to catch you. They stood together in the dark for a long time. The lamp flickered. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, cold and indifferent. Finally, he turned, looked at her face, half lit by the dying lamp. There's something else. His voice was hoarse. The letter from the lawyer. She waited. Thomas wrote me something. The day before he died. They found it in his things. His hand tightened around hers. I never knew it existed. 8 years. And I never knew. The summons came on a gray morning in the 9th week. A deputy rode up the mountain trail just after dawn. His horse lathered and breathing hard. He handed Elias a folded paper, touched his hat to Abigail, and turned back down the road without a word. Elias read the document twice. His jaw tightened with each line. Hearing regarding mental competency and property rights. Attendance mandatory. Failure to appear will result in forfeiture of all claims. Finch. The name came out flat. Hard. Abigail took the paper from his hands. Read it herself. Her fingers went white at the edges, but her face stayed calm. When tomorrow? Town hall. 10 o'clock. She set the paper on the table, smoothed it flat with both hands. Then we go tomorrow. Abigail. We... She looked up at him. Together. The ride down the mountain took 3 hours. Neither spoke. The wagon wheels crunched over frozen mud, and the horse's breath made clouds in the cold air. Abigail's back ached from the jolting bench, but she didn't complain, didn't shift, just sat straight and watched the town grow larger below. Copper Ridge looked different in the morning light. Smaller, meaner. The church steeple threw a long shadow across the main street. People stopped on the boardwalk to stare as they passed the recluse from the mountain and the woman who'd stayed. The town hall was a single room with wooden benches and a raised platform at the front. 3 men in dark suits sat behind a table the county board. None of them faces Elias recognized. Finch occupied the front row, his associates flanking him like bookends. A 4th man sat beside them, gray-bearded, carrying a black leather bag. The room was full. Half the town had come to watch. Elias found seats near the back. Abigail lowered herself onto the bench beside him. Her hip pressed against his. The wood creaked under her weight. Someone in the row ahead glanced back, then quickly away. The chairman called the hearing to order. Finch rose first. He spoke for 10 minutes, painting pictures with his words: a dangerous hermit, a man who couldn't keep a wife, a man who talked to horses and kept to himself and probably shouldn't be trusted with property that affected the whole community's water supply. "I've brought an expert witness," Finch gestured to the gray-bearded man. "Dr. Hadley, from Denver. He's examined cases like this before." The doctor stood, adjusted his spectacles. Prolonged isolation can produce a particular kind of madness. Melancholia, paranoid tendencies, an inability to form normal human attachments. He looked directly at Elias. 6 women fled that cabin. 6. That pattern suggests a deeply troubled mind. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Heads nodded. "I've also brought a witness who experienced Mr. Morgan's instability firsthand." Finch turned toward a woman sitting near the window. "Mrs. Josephine Hartley. She was the 4th bride. She can tell you exactly what kind of man we're dealing with." Josephine stood, thin and pale, hair the color of winter wheat, hands trembling as she smoothed her skirts. Abigail watched her. Watched the way her eyes darted to Elias, then away. Watched the way she gripped the back of the bench in front of her, like she might fall without it. "Mrs. Hartley." Finch's voice was smooth as axle grease. "Tell the board what it was like, living with that man." Josephine's mouth opened, closed. "He was..." She swallowed, started again. "He was..." The room held its breath. "He was quiet." The words came out barely above a whisper. "So quiet. I couldn't stand it, the silence up there, the way it pressed in on you. I started hearing things, seeing things that weren't there." Finch frowned, Samos. "But surely he was cruel. Surely he frightened you, threatened you." "He never raised a hand to me." Josephine's voice grew stronger. Her eyes found Abigail across the room, found her sitting straight-backed beside the man she'd fled from, found her staying when Josephine had run. Something shifted in her face. "He never raised his voice. He just didn't know how to talk. And I didn't know how to listen." "Mrs. Hartley, that's not what you told me when we discussed..." "I know what I told you, Mr. Finch." Her chin lifted. "I was angry. I was embarrassed. I wanted someone to blame because it was easier than admitting I wasn't strong enough for the life I'd chosen." She turned to face the board. "Elias Morgan isn't cruel. He's just a man who's been alone too long. And that isn't a crime." She sat down. The room buzzed like a kicked hive. Finch's face had gone the color of raw liver. He spread his hands toward the board. "Gentlemen, clearly this woman has been..." "I'd like to speak." Abigail's voice cut through the noise. She was already rising, her hands steady at her sides, her bulk blocking the aisle. The chairman leaned forward. "And you are Abigail Morgan, his wife." More murmurs. Finch's mouth worked like a fish dragged onto dry land. "Mrs. Morgan." The chairman gestured toward the front. "You may address the board." Abigail walked forward. Slowly, deliberately, the floorboards groaned under her weight, and she heard someone snicker in the back row. She didn't turn, didn't falter. "6 women left that cabin," she said when she reached the front. "I stayed. Not because Elias Morgan is easy to live with, he isn't. Not because he's charming or sweet or any of those things women are supposed to want in a husband." She turned to face the crowd. "I stayed because I know what it looks like when a man's been broken by grief. I know what it sounds like when someone's pushing you away because they're terrified you'll leave on your own." Her eyes found Finch. "Mr. Finch, you've been after that spring since before I set foot in this territory. You don't care about this town's welfare. You don't care about Elias Morgan's state of mind. You care about water rights and money and making sure nobody stands between you and what you want." She took a step toward him. He didn't retreat this time, but his face had gone pale. "You want to know what kind of man Elias Morgan is? He's the kind who keeps 6 quilts in a cedar chest because he couldn't throw away something women made with their own hands. He's the kind who blames himself for a death that happened 8 years ago and 1,000 miles away. He's the kind who forgot how to let anyone close because everyone he ever loved ended up leaving or dying." Her voice dropped. "And he's the kind of man worth fighting for, which is more than anyone in this room can say about you." Silence. The stove ticked in the corner. Someone coughed. The chairman cleared his throat. "Mr. Finch, do you have any additional evidence to present?" Finch looked at Josephine, who wouldn't meet his eyes, looked at his associates, who were studying their boots, looked at the crowd, whose faces had shifted from curiosity to something harder to read. "No," he said finally. "No additional evidence." "Then this board finds no cause to question Mr. Morgan's competency or his right to his property." The gavel came down. Case dismissed. Elias stood. His legs felt strange beneath him, weak, shaky, like he'd been holding something heavy for years and had just set it down. Abigail walked back to him, took his hand. Her fingers were rough and warm against his palm. They walked out of the town hall together, on the front steps in full view of everyone who'd come to watch him fall. Elias stopped. He lifted her hand, pressed his lips to her knuckles. "Let's go home," he said. The ride back up the mountain took longer than the ride down. Or maybe it just felt that way. Abigail sat beside Elias on the wagon bench, the horses picking their careful path up the familiar trail. Neither of them spoke. But the silence was different now, soft around the edges, warm despite the November wind cutting across the peaks. Her hand rested on the bench between them. Halfway up the mountain, his hand found hers, stayed there. The cabin appeared through the pines as the sun dropped toward the western ridge. Smoke still curled from the chimney the fire she'd banked that morning had held through the day. Elias pulled the wagon to a stop, climbed down, came around to her side. He offered his hand. She took it. Let him help her down. Though her knees protested and her back had stiffened into a solid ache from hours on the hard bench. His palm was rough against hers, calloused from years of work, but his grip was gentle. "I'll see to the horses," he said. "I'll start supper." They moved apart, came back together. The rhythm of it felt natural now, 2 people who'd learned each other's steps without meaning to. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and the dried sage hanging from the rafters. Abigail hung up her coat, her good coat, the one she'd worn to town, tied on her apron, started pulling ingredients from the pantry. The door opened behind her. Elias came in, Bringing the smell of hay and horse and cold mountain air, he hung his coat beside hers on the hook by the door, rolled up his sleeves. "What can I do?" She handed him the knife. Potatoes, small pieces. They worked side by side at the table. The blade made soft, thunking sounds against the cutting board. The fire crackled in the stove. Outside, the light was fading, painting the peaks in shades of copper and rose. Supper was simple: potatoes and salt pork, and the last of the cornbread from yesterday. But Elias cleared his plate and reached for seconds. He helped her wash the dishes without being asked, his hands moving beside hers in the soapy water, their elbows bumping in the small space. When the kitchen was clean, he took her hand. "Come outside with me." The porch was cold, but the sky was clear. Stars were beginning to prick through the deepening blue. Faint at first, then brighter as the last light bled out of the west. The valley spread out below them like a quilt, patches of forest and meadow and rock, stitched together by the silver thread of the creek. Elias sat down on the top step. She lowered herself beside him, her joints protesting, the wood cold through her skirts. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what you said in there, about choices." She waited. The evening star hung low over the peaks, bright and steady. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out something small, something that caught the fading light, and held it. A ring, gold, simple. The band worn thin from years of wearing. "This was my mother's." His voice was rough. She wore it every day of her married life, 43 years. When she died, Pa gave it to me, said I should save it for the woman I chose to spend my life with. He turned the ring over in his fingers. The metal gleamed dully in the last light. "I kept it in a drawer, same drawer as Thomas's watch. Figured I'd never have cause to take it out." Abigail's throat tightened. She didn't trust herself to speak. "When you came here," Elias said, "I didn't choose you. The agency sent you. You were just the next name on a list. Another woman I figured would be gone by the end of the week." He looked at her then. Really looked. The way he'd started doing these past weeks, like he was seeing something he hadn't expected to find and didn't quite know what to do with. "But I'm choosing you now." His voice cracked on the words. "Not because you stayed. Because I want you to keep staying. Because when I think about tomorrow, and the day after that, and all the days after that, I want you in them." She looked at the ring in his palm. Such a small thing, such a fragile thing. But it had survived 43 years on his mother's hand. It could survive a few more on hers. "You don't have to do this," she said. "I already told you I ain't going nowhere." "I know." He took her left hand, held it carefully, like something that might break. "But I needed to ask, needed you to know it was a choice. My choice. Not just settling for whoever showed up." Her eyes stung. She blinked hard. "All right then." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit like it had been waiting for her. They sat together on the porch steps until the cold drove them inside. He built up the fire while she lit the kerosene lamp. The cabin glowed warm and golden against the darkness outside. She watched him move to the cedar chest in the corner, watched him lift the lid, reach inside, pull out the quilts one by one, 6 of them, blue, yellow, white with red stitching, green, cream with brown edges, pale pink. He laid them across the back of the rocking chair in a careful stack. Then he reached in again and pulled out the 7th, the one she'd been piecing together these past weeks. Stitched from scraps of flour sacks and his old worn-out shirts. She hadn't known he'd seen her working on it. Hadn't known he'd put it in the chest with the others. He carried it to the bedroom, spread it across the bed, smoothed it flat with both hands. "This one stays out," he said. She stood in the doorway watching him. The lamplight caught the gold on her finger. "Supper's going cold," she said. He turned and smiled. A real smile. One that reached his eyes and stayed there. "Reckon so." They walked back to the main room together. The fire burned steady in the stove. 2 chairs sat side by side near the hearth, neither one empty anymore. "Elias, I ain't going nowhere." His hand found hers, held on. "I know." Some stories settle into you quietly, the way snow settles on a windowsill. This one might stay with you for a while, not asking to be understood, just asking to be felt. Many of us know what it's like to carry something heavy for a long time. To push people away before they have the chance to leave on their own. Some of us have stood in doorways watching someone go, telling ourselves it was better that way. And perhaps you know what it feels like to be the one who wasn't chosen first, the one who showed up anyway. Not because anyone expected you to stay, but because something deep down whispered that this was where you were meant to be. We carry these things, the leaving and the staying, the slow, careful work of letting someone see the parts of us we'd rather keep hidden. It's all right if this story doesn't resolve itself neatly in your mind. It's okay to let it rest there, unfinished. The way most true things are. Not everything needs to be explained. Some things just need to be witnessed. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening.